أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I figured to tell my story the best way would be for me to write it down so I do not miss the details that are relevant or add things to the story that aren't true. I wrote this story down a few months after this has happened in order to keep it as authentic and true as possible. And so we begin. This is my story. My name is Alan, and today is November 2nd, 2022. And as you read the title, this is my near-death experience and how I met Allah in my experience, which led me to the religion of Islam. The accident happened on the night of July 4th, 2020. I wanted to make this video right away, but instead I wrote down exactly what happened while it was still fresh in my mind. But by the will of Allah, here it is. Alhamdulillah. And this is my testimony to the truth. But before we get into this, there are some context and things you should know about me before we move on. To start, we need to go back to the very beginning. And for me, that would be at the age of 3, the day I first gained consciousness. For as long as I can remember, I remember the very first memory I had was in fact a dream. And that dream was with me speaking with someone where I said, "I want to speak of your glory." And then I woke up in a 3-year-old body facing a blank white wall on the bed that was at the corner of the room with my face directly in front of the wall while laying on my right side. And the memories of the body before then merged with what I now call myself. Like your consciousness is now tethered to your body. And I say this for the people who can relate that you are not alone. For me, it was the very first memory that I can recall, not counting the dream. Some of the stuff I'm sharing may not make sense right away. This is where I'll ask you to have patience, to hold off until I tied everything together. May Allah reward you all for your patience. Allahumma Ameen. I was born into a traditional and cultural Chinese family in Brooklyn, New York. In the family, we are not religious and have no concepts of Abrahamic faiths. But there are concepts of afterlife, respectfully, across all traditions. There were some idol worshipping, and invoking false deities was normal within the traditions. Growing up as a teen, I was a proud atheist in my earlier years and a devil praiser for a short phase in school, in junior high school. After I was out of that phase, I was a proud atheist up until the age of 18, 19, when I first heard of the law of attraction and realized there are these forces of the unseen at play around us at all times that plays a bigger part in our ultimate reality. At this point of my life, I considered myself spiritual but not religious. I started smoking marijuana at 15, and that lasted a decade. It started with the typical high school scenes, and somewhere when I was around 22, I heard of psychedelics, particularly psychedelic mushrooms or magic mushrooms. And after doing intensive and exhaustive research of what psychedelics are, I read a lot of reviews that people come to discover God on psychedelics, or finding themselves, or figuring out the universal mysteries of life. These are real experiences that people, and myself included, have experienced. So by the time I got my hands on some mushrooms, it was a few days before my birthday, and I tried them for the first time on my 23rd birthday. And boy, it was such a profound and mind-blowing experience that immediately I made a goal to trip on them 100 times in a single year. And my birthday is on March, so I stubbornly completed my goal in 9 months while having tried LSD and DMT along the line. The thing that intrigued me most about DMT, besides it being the strongest psychedelic known to man, was that the effect it produced is similar to dying. They say it's like dying without actually dying. And now that we got the context out of the way, we now flash forward to the day I became Muslim. At 25 years old on the night of July 4th, 2020, in Brooklyn during the first year of the pandemic. It was like any other day during that time. One of my friends got off work around 11:30 p.m. and asked me if I wanted to come over to his house, smoke, and watch some TV. The typical stoner vibes. As I'm entering my friend's house, he looks over to me as he's turning the key and says, "Yo, we're gonna take some Molly and chill." I said no because I've never tried that before, and I thought he was joking because he's never asked me that before. Afterwards, when we settled down, we started smoking and chilling, and he asked me a few more times if I wanted some, to which I said, sure. So knowing that I've done shrooms, LSD, DMT, I thought to myself, this ain't nothing I can't handle. And so my friend proceeded to give me probably a full dose and a tad bit more, just to make sure I feel it. And it was good, but a strong experience. Afterwards, about 2 hours in, it was around 2 a.m. right now. He suggested that I should take a little more. It was already strong for me, but I guess I was keeping it together, so he felt it was probably weak for me. And at the time, I had no idea that he had a tolerance to this. So I thought he was giving me safe doses to try out, but I believe to this day he was probably giving me what he himself would have took as a dose. So right away after the mixing drug with water for the second time of that night, immediately, a few moments later, maybe 2 to 3 minutes after, there it was. My body started to feel hot and heavy. My stomach wasn't feeling well. I felt the intensity of the drug spike through the roof. The first one was already strong, so by default, this is too strong. Now I am worried. My body began to sweat uncontrollably from the head all the way down to the feet. The sweating was so fast that now I began to panic. And while in a state of panic, I got up and ran to the kitchen sink, which was about 10 feet away from the living room couch. And as a reference point, I know of someone who passed away from the same substance a few years prior to my incident. So I was fully aware of the fact that these are and can be fatal, unlike mushrooms or DMT. So when I got to the sink, I drank a few handfuls of water in hopes that I would not meet the same fate and to not die of dehydration. My body was so heavy, I ran back to the couch and laid back, and the moment my back touched the couch, I leaned forward and threw up in the garbage in front of me. And because I was rolling on Molly and had a few joints in, I was having what people who tried ayahuasca would say, having a profound experience while throwing up. And while throwing up, the speed of thought in my mind was so fast, like a DMT trip, but even greater because I imagined that all the DMT in my brain is being released. And being on the effects of both drugs while not feeling well wasn't helping my situation. That was the first throw up. Right away, I threw up a second time. On the second time, my thoughts was even faster than before, except this time, it wasn't thoughts. It is now my life flashing before my eyes. As I've told you at the beginning, my very first memory was me facing the white wall, that this is my first recorded memory. As my life flashed before my eyes, I saw this white silhouette in every second and moment of my life. The most vivid memory I saw was when I was studying for the college exams, and the white figure was the one who was guiding me in my studies. Like he was the one pointing me to turn the page and copy which notes and how I compiled my work. That figure showed me that it was there all this time guiding me subconsciously to get to where I need to be. As the flashing was happening, as the flash happening, it reached to the point of present day. I saw a bunch of other visions that still doesn't make sense to me to this day. But by the will of Allah, He won't let me recall it, but He did leave me with the experience of it. This was all happening in a matter of 10 to 15 seconds from the first throw up. So about 22 years of memory went by in a flash, literally. So I felt better right away, but at this moment, the flashes of visions was too much to bear. This is when my vision started going black. This was the moment I started begging and crying out to God in my head and asking Him for help. And I was thinking about how sorry I was to have put my friend through all the trouble of what's to come after an overdose. And because I knew what was to come after my consciousness gets severed, this is it, I thought. I didn't get to say goodbye to anyone, and that I was going to die of the same reason of someone I knew. I thought about the disappointment, the disgrace, and pain I would cause to my family and have went out like this. The gossip that would follow among family, friends, and people who know you. The types of image I would have left to all the lives that are connected to mine. This was not something I can be positive about in that moment. But above all else, I didn't want my friend to live with the burden of him thinking it was his fault. And when push comes to shove, the moment finally came. I could no longer do my best to stay conscious despite all the consciousness expanding psychedelics and mystical DMT experiences. This is the real thing, death. And if my life ended that day, I would have had regrets. And there I was, after everything went black. Before I knew it, I was already transported to this other realm or dimension, where the scene was like a forest fire, like how it is smoky with orange flames and brown in the air. But it was like dust, except there was nothing burning. It was like being in a thick fog that is smoky, orange and brown, and barely any visibility. I couldn't see anything other than that dusty fog, and it was like that all around. And me having tried DMT, I wasn't exactly surprised that I found myself in another dimension because I've had plenty of these out-of-body experiences. And that's why I went through the trouble of giving you the context, because this was what I was thinking when I was there. And after I had been there for what seemed to be a couple of seconds, I started to panic when I realized that this is it. That's the afterlife for me. This isn't where I belong. And as my thoughts jumped and raced, I was about to panic, even while being in the other realm. Because after looking around, I realized this one simple truth, that there is not a single sign of life or greenery in here. I didn't belong there, and I didn't want to be there, I thought to myself. And right before I was about to despair, before I knew it, I found myself being transported, once again, going up so fast all the way into the clouds. And there it was. What appeared before me was the sun. I was sprawled out in the air above the clouds with the T or the A pose. The sun and everything else around me, which was this nothing but clouds and open space in the sky, and the sun directly in front of me had this beautiful golden light, unlike anything you've ever seen or felt before. Probably even better than the best golden hour you've witnessed in your life. I was surrounded by this light, and before I can ask, where am I hear this voice loud and clear, and then I hear a voice that said, I am Allah. And I noticed that it was coming from the sun, and the moment I heard his name, all of my questions and concerns have been answered, in the sense of revelation where the knowledge just comes to you by a divine source. So all the questions I had for God and why he do things the way he does has already been answered with just his name alone. He showed me that this is why he is the Almighty and indeed the All-Knowing. He knew everything I was going to ask, and he answered with his name before I can even speak. This is how he showed me his wisdom. And then I had other questions for him with sort of an attitude. So I asked him, what do you have to say about these terrorists? The things you hear on media? So if God wants to clarify things with me, now's the time. And he responded with everything happens by my will. And at that moment, which at first seemed to be a vague reply, turned into a profound one, because he showed me an example. And that example was how I am here right now, standing right before him, only because he willed it. That this too is by his will and his will alone, for nothing can happen unless God willed it. From that response, I now fully understood that everything that has happened to me and everyone else at this point in time was all a part of the test, and that Judgment Day is real, and that Allah is the ultimate reality. And then I asked him, Allah, but why is Allah your name? And why Muslims? And his answer to me was, Islam is the final truth. Now for context, while I was asking him that, as I said in the beginning, I had no concepts of Abrahamic faiths. I've heard of things of Jesus, peace be upon him, and all I knew about Islam at that exact moment was that Muslims couldn't eat pork, their women wore headscarves, and they fast 1 month of the year. I didn't even know alcohol was forbidden. And because my life flashed before my eyes, before I came to that place, I was reminded of a point in my life when I would insult my Lord, His name and His blessed book and people during my teenage years. I had disdain towards the religion of Islam growing up because of this online game I played called Silk Road. And the Egyptians and the Turk in the game were known scammers. And sometimes after they scam you, they would mention Allah's name or indicate that they were somehow affiliated. And one of the scams, after getting scammed countless times, that was the last straw for me at that time. So I used real money to buy global chats in the game, so I can shout out to the whole server and I would say rude things about Allah. And in Turkish, I'd say Allah yok, which means no God. And a server would message me with mean things in return. So knowing that, you can only imagine how much shame and embarrassment I felt because I am now brought before the Lord I used to ridicule. And knowing that God knows everything, me simply remembering that memory was terrifying because I now know that God knows everything, including what I was thinking. Now this is the part where it got scary for me. Now Allah shows me my soul in His hand, and one glance at it, I knew it was my soul. What they say about the soul is true, that it is indeed made of light. And then I noticed that Allah was starting to move away into the background with my soul, implying that He's leaving, and I don't know what's going to happen after that. So I started pleading and begging Him as He was going away with my soul. I cried out, "Oh Allah, if you take me right now, then my friend back on earth will have to deal with a dead corpse. Please, don't do that to him. I know it was my fault, but he shouldn't have to live with that burden." And then that was when Allah stopped and He made His proposal to me, straight out of the scene in Matrix. Then I found myself in a scene where I was offered the Matrix red pill, blue pill ultimatum. Yes, exactly like the movie. He didn't say anything to me, but I knew if I took the red pill, I would wake up from this experience thinking if I took the blue pill, I would just wake up from this experience thinking it was just nonsense, a trick of the mind, or maybe I was just off the drugs and a near-death experience was just a trick of the mind, that none of this is real, it was just a bad daydream. And if I took the red pill, I would be full-on Muslim, pious to the extreme. But I knew that wasn't who I actually am, or someone I wanted to be at that moment in time. So what did I do? I took both the pills, the red and the blue. The red to become a Muslim, and the blue to retain my personality. Now anyone who has had a mystical experience knows that these visions that you see are in the mind are sometimes more real than real, and it is just happening somewhere else. And then Allah showed me how we were all believers when we were created. So I adopted the concept that everybody was born Muslim, meaning submitted to God without even knowing that it already exists within the religion of Islam. And then He proceeded to show me how He was in charge of every single situation and matter, and He's aware of it all. And by allowing my life to flash before my eyes, there was certainly some great wisdom that He taught me in that experience alone. He showed me that He has the power over all things, including how one transitions to the next life, and that life and death bends to His will alone. And then immediately after, Allah said, "Your life now belongs to me." What He actually meant by that was to submit to Him and His will after I come back. And that was when I felt assured that He was going to return me to my body. So by the will of Allah, He allowed me to know what it feels like to truly be forgiven for your past sins. And He made an extra reminder for me to never forget that everything happens by His will. Because when you come into the religion of Islam, all your past sins are forgiven. Then there I was, my consciousness shot back to my body, like my 3-year-old experience. I felt like a newborn once again, and I woke up, which only appeared to be like 10 minutes or so. and I felt all the burdens or this thing that was heavy on me suddenly disappear. After I woke up, the thing that disappeared was my existential crisis. I now no longer need to ask, who put me here or why am I here? What is my purpose? I am no longer burdened with these questions now. And immediately after I woke up, my jaws just dropped and I turned my head towards the left, and my words to my friend was, I just saw Allah. Like that. Now you can only imagine the shock on his face. I didn't even know he was Muslim, but he told me himself he was a person who left Islam at that time because he stopped believing, and that led him to not practicing. Whether it was the truth or not, after telling him about my experience and answering every question he had to ask about it, he was convinced. And by the time this happened, if you are Muslim, it is important to note that this was actually during the time of Tahajjud during the summer. And Allah also said in the hadith that He comes down to the lowest heaven during the last third of the night to forgive whoever asks Him for it. And indeed, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has spoken the truth. So moving forward, in the same night, around Fajr time, when I was explaining everything to my friend, so technically it was July 5th, but because I didn't sleep, it is still the 4th for me. One more reference point to finish the story of the night. Now remember, Allah said, your life now belongs to me. I've once saw a Muslim prank video a while back where the Muslim brother was going around asking people to repeat after him, and he would have them repeat the Shahada. So knowing that, I knew what had to be done in order to become a Muslim. To become a Muslim, one must utter those words with full faith in their hearts. And so my friend Googled the Shahada, and we said it together. But the version of the Shahada I saw by the will of Allah was the informal one, the one that reads, I bear witness that there is no deity worthy of worship except Allah, and I bear witness that Muhammad is the final messenger and slave of Allah. After that, I went to my friend's balcony, right from the living room, and the sun was rising. After what happened, the sun is a sign of my Lord, and although it is a fact that He appeared before me as the sun, that doesn't mean that He is the sun. And when I returned from the balcony, my friend put a video of Dr. Imam Omar Suleiman on stage, the video with the Muslim, Christian, and the Jew, the three faiths talking together, and I fell asleep after 10 minutes because of the exhaustion. By that time it was already like 5-6 o'clock in the morning. And that is the full story of my near-death experience that led me to Islam. O Allah, bear witness that I have conveyed the truth. Thank you all for watching, and may Allah guide us all to the straight path. And may Allah reward you all for your patience. Help a brother out and share my story with the world. Thank you once again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.